Thank you, Daryl, and thank you, Jeff, and the association for allowing me to speak today. I'm excited for the panel coming up. So there's going to be 4 of us speaking on the topics of refracs and Bakken optimization for production out of the region. And so I'm going to have a few quick opening remarks on refracs before we move into the other panel experts. And so refracs, if there was kind of a buzzword in the midstream industry that I work in, the pipelines processing, I think for 2017, I think refracs is definitely one of the buzzwords. And so I want to just catch everyone up with what a refrac is, what does it mean, what have we seen in North Dakota. Some of our panel experts will be talking from their company perspectives and where they may be headed in the future. And so refracs, where are they? And so a refrac is recompletion of an existing well a second time. So it's a well that was hydraulically fractured at one point in its life, and the company then came back to the well, re-stimulated it with newer technology, newer techniques in order to refresh the production from that well. And so in North Dakota we have over 180 wells that we were able to identify that have been refracted. You'll notice the map on the left and then the bar charts on the left. Dunn County accounts for roughly half of all the refracs that have taken place. And so again, that central portion, as you can see on the map on the right hand side of your screen, very active in that central portion of Dunn County. Again, the age of these wells typically ranges from about 4 to 5 years on average of the lifespan of a well, and that typically puts a well drilled between that 2008 and 2011 time frame. So if you remember to where the industry was at in that time period, a lot of single stage fracs, pump and pray was kind of the slang term for some of the techniques that were used in hydraulically fracturing, and we now have vastly superior knowledge of completion techniques, the number of stages, the amount of proppant, the fluid required, and so they're taking those older wells and re-stimulating them across the state. And so when has this been active? This is not something that the industry just started recently. You'll notice the most active years were back actually in 2012, 2014, but it continues to stay active again as the industry builds up its knowledge base on this technology and as it starts to assess where it's going to be appropriate to deploy these refracs around western North Dakota. And so what does a refrac look like? On the screen, just focus on the top line chart. And so this is that typical Bakken well decline that a lot of us are used to. We know the wells produce very strong initially. They've got that steep decline curve, and then originally the thought process was these will just decline out until they're no longer economic to produce. In this case, you can notice the well was shut down for a period of time, and this company came back in, refracted it, and in this case had a better performing well after the refrac than it did originally. All I'm showing on the bottom of these line charts is just the refrac life of the well. So again, essentially creating, in essence, from a production standpoint, a new well for the midstream folks that I work with to have to process and move those fluids to market. Just another example, this is a really good example of a well that was using older technology, very little production, and a completely new life coming into that well later in its lifespan. For full disclosure, when we do look at the numbers, not everything was a barn burner. The industry is still learning and trying to figure out the best ways to apply this technology. Here you can see the refrac took place, the original decline, and again, we saw some modest improvement in production, but nowhere near those first 2 examples. And another fourth example, just for the group again, the refrac occurred and not a significant improvement. And so I don't have the details of why these weren't as successful as the first examples. Was it a technique that was applied? Was it the geology? What was it that made these wells less successful? Those are things that the industry, Charles Gorecki, that you're going to hear from later, that his organizations are working on those type of answers. And so on average, why this is important to me from the pipeline authority perspective is, again, this is production that needs to be moved to market, and the midstream companies take several years to put together any sizable projects, and they need to know what's on the horizon. And so again, just a good graphic, an example. We'll just look at Dunn County because it has the best number of wells. Again, this was the average well performance during the original completion, and then on average the well performance after the refracs. And so you'll notice that the refracs, on average, are performing better than the original well lives. And again, intuitively that makes sense because of applying the new technology to wells that, again, were completed in a technique that just wasn't accessing all of the resource available to that operator. On the natural gas side, it's even more prolific. The gas volumes after the refracs are significantly higher than they were during the original completion time frame. So what does that mean from a company perspective? Again, this is just one well example. The original decline, as the well was aging, if it was allowed to just continue its decline, I was assuming that it would follow that gray curve. The company came back in, refracted it, and in this example, just over 250,000 barrels of new production that they were able to produce from that well that they just simply were not accessing using that original completion. Another example, just over 250,000. And so from a pricing perspective, the big question that I get asked a lot is how prolific is this technique going to be? What price point does it take? How many barrels do they need to produce in order to make this economic? And so we see it in larger scale. So what I did, I performed just some simple economics using the additional oil production that was going to be produced from these wells after the refrac had taken place. And so again, it's this incremental production that we're looking at in this next couple slides on refrac economics. And so I assume that a company is going to want at least 10 to 20% after-tax rate of return in order to make these a viable option. And so using what was current a couple weeks ago, $45 at the wellhead for the operator price for that crude oil, depending upon how much additional oil they were able to recover out of that refrac, we'll just use 300,000 barrels, for example. If they were able to get an additional 300,000 barrels of oil, depending upon their costs, if it cost them $3 million or $4 million to refrac that well, they would achieve a 10 to 20% rate of return. Obviously, as you get the higher incremental oil production out of those wells, you get higher rates of return in the current oil price environment. If you're not able to get, if you're only able to get an additional 100,000 barrels out of that well, it's not going to be economic in today's price point. So again, the companies are looking at how much is this costing me to do. There's a wide range, and you'll hear that from some of our industry panelists in a moment, of what it's costing them and some of the challenges associated with that. And then some of the break-even prices. So again, at the higher price points, the higher production returns, you're able to make those economic in a $40, $50 world. For the more marginal areas of the state where you're only able to produce an additional 100, 200,000 barrels, you're going to be north of that 60 to north of $80 per barrel that it would take to make those regions attractive. So with that, I hope this was a good way to set the stage for our next panelists.